Everybody, this is John Allemeier, um, and he was my first composition teacher, orchestration arranging professor at UNC Charlotte. So I'd like to congratulate him on and on kind of like getting me on the path for this stuff and showing me anyway what was possible. But anyway, so I'll let you explain yourself and where you're at, where you were, and what you're up to, and what you're going to share.
Cool, cool. Thank you, Elizabeth. So, greetings, everyone. I hope you are all safe and tucked away in your little corners of the world. I'm certainly in a little corner of the world at the moment. I was telling other people I'm in my daughter's room in temporary housing in Virginia. So it's not super prestigious right now. But anyway, so yeah, I wanted, so the topic for today is external influences on our creative process. And I want to get into that, but I want to take you sort of step by step a little bit, give you some of my background to see where I'm coming from. I'll share a little bit of my music as examples for that. I do have an ear pod that likes to squirt out, and so I keep doing that, so don't let that distract you too much. So to give you sort of my background, I grew up in the Midwest. I'm from Northern Illinois, and I grew up in sort of a suburban rural environment, which was, so I wasn't really engaged with a strong sort of arts community. And so what I knew of classical music was sort of the local, partially professional symphony, which mainly played the classics. I had piano lessons, I had voice lessons, I sang in choirs, I played in garage bands. So that's where I was pretty much up through high school. And one of the things that I wanted to share with you was really a pivotal moment, and I share this every year with the festival participants because it was such an important thing for me. And so if you see me start looking confused, it's because I'm about to share my screen. So let me get back to the top here. And so one of the things that that really sort of blew me away is, so I'm this Midwestern kid, high school kid, singing in choirs, singing in church choirs, and playing in my garage band. And then I stay up late at night, and it's after Saturday Night Live one Saturday night. I kept staying up, and all of a sudden, David Sanborn's Night Music was on. And I don't know if any of you know this show, but this was a show that was on NBC from 1988 to 1990. I know a lot of, probably before many of you were born. But this was this amazing show. So this is on NBC. So this is a mainstream network. And I'm just going to push play here. I don't have the audio for you, but you can look this up later. And so, I know symphonies that are playing, Mozart and Beethoven. I know string quartets that are playing, Mozart and Beethoven. And then I turn this on and I find Kronos Quartet playing an electrified version of Purple Haze by Jimi Hendrix. And it sort of blew me away. I had no idea, like, is that okay for us to do that? It was really probably my first question. Like it was almost like the classical music had these boundaries to it that were really, really restrictive. And so, and I'll tell you, night music, it had, so Kronos Quartet, so it had new music people, a lot of jazz people, so like Dizzy Gillespie, I think Miles Davis was on it. And then even like Lou Reed and the Red Hot Chili Peppers were on it. And so there's this sort of amalgamation of all these styles and all of these ideas, which were, and I just met all of a sudden, like the boundaries, like what I was doing in my garage band versus what I was seeing at the symphony concerts and singing in choirs, like all those boundaries just sort of melted away. And it really, really just sort of changed me. And then shortly after that, I went on to my undergraduate to study music, and again, in a very traditional context. And the college that I went to had a new music series, which is fairly common now, but actually fairly new back then. And so the poster for that concert series was I believe it was one of the Crumb scores. I believe it was the Spiral. I don't know exactly which piece that was, but anyway, so I went to that, and I started getting introduced to Cage and Messiaen and all those composers that I just didn't really know existed. Those two experiences really sort of sent me down my path in sort of a career in new music. They were so profound to me at that time. So I share those. Look up night music if you get a chance. There's some really amazing performance that you'll find there. So I'm going to share you this. So this just gives you a little bit of background. So who's talking at you right now? So if I go sort of reverse in my chronology, so bachelor's degree in guitar performance, and I did my master's at Northwestern in composition and PhD in composition at the University of Iowa. And then my first teaching position was at Marshall University in Huntington, West Virginia. And I was there for 2 years. And near the end of the second year, my wife, who'd been working for the federal government, got a job offer in Germany. And so I said, heck yes, living in Germany sounds a lot more interesting than living in West Virginia. No offense to anyone who's in West Virginia. But so I resigned my tenure track position, and then I was just a composer knocking around in Europe for 5 years, and that's where you see Darmstadt and the Czech Republic sort of come in down here on the educational side of it. Came back to the United States in 2005. In 2006, I started as a professor of composition at UNC Charlotte. That's where I met Elizabeth, and I was at UNC Charlotte for 14 years, which ends this month. And then starting actually July 1st officially, I'm going to be the director of the School of Music at James Madison University. And so I'm currently in temporary housing in Virginia until I can find a place to live here in Virginia. So, so that gives you some background there. And then just a little snapshot of me as an artist. I really have to make a point to talk about modern dance. When I started at UNC Charlotte, one of my colleagues, E.E. Balkos, who's one of the dance faculty at UNC Charlotte, he asked me if he could choreograph some of my music. And from that moment on, I think for about 12 years, I almost wrote exclusively for modern dance. So E.E. Balkos, his company was E.E. Motion. He doesn't have that anymore. He's now dances with Movement Migration. That's an up and coming dance company in Charlotte, headed by Kim Jones, who's a former Graham dancer. She's another UNC Charlotte faculty member. But so these are some of the modern dance groups that I've worked with. And then down here, this is sort of a snapshot. It's 18 months of composing. The orchestra piece was supposed to be performed on November 30th, 2020, as a remembrance piece there was a shooting on UNC Charlotte's campus on April 30th in 2019. And so on the 1-year anniversary, that was supposed to be performed. Of course, the pandemic came, and it was supposed to be performed by the Charlotte Symphony with video by video artist Jeff Murphy, but that was canceled because of the pandemic. So that one didn't happen. We did a digital version of it that was streamed online. But and I'll talk about A Cold Coyote Calls and the cremation of Sam McGee during my talk there. But so those are some of the recent things that I've done. So let me check my notes and make sure that I'm on track here. I'm going to stop sharing so you guys can see me a little bit. So I wanted to talk about external influences on our creativity. And right now, a lot of you, if you're music students and composition programs, you're kind of in idyllic situations where you are surrounded by musicians that'll play your music. And so you're sort of what I tell my students is you're sort of in the petri dish right now. You're in a lab environment as opposed to being out sort of engaging in the world. And what you need to do is make a successful transition from being in that sort of petri dish into being an artist that actually engages with the outside world. And so many years ago, I was asked to write a piece for a sculpture dedication. And so, backing up, the sculpture dedication was going to be on this date, and then backing up 6 months, and the sculpture wasn't even done. And so I get in the mail these schematics for the sculpture that doesn't even exist yet. And I'm supposed to write a piece, not inspired by the sculpture, but inspired by schematics and pictures of a sculpture. And so I'm looking at this, and I'm like, I don't, which part of the sculpture is B flat? Can somebody help, make that connection? So I didn't, and I think a lot of us do this. Is what I did is I wrote a piece of music that I wanted to write, and I gave it a programmatic title that attached it to the sculpture, and I called it done. And probably not the most successful approach to that kind of thing. And I will tell you, so what I'm hopefully going to do is give you some strategies, and that's not the approach you'll use, but you'll try to, um, you know, engage at least in the artwork in some way. So so one of the things I want to start talking about at least is the compositional process a little bit, because I think when we understand the compositional process, then we can begin to understand how we can interject those outside influences into that process, and then make it being sort of more of a meaningful process, meaningful artistic product. So I'm going to go back to my slides here. So this is a super rudimentary. Oh, sorry, I'm jumping around. This is a super rudimentary slide of the compositional process as I see it. And I think most of us would agree this is sort of how it works, right? And so we have this pre-compositional work we do when we're banging the big rocks into little rocks. We are making very technical decisions. And so right from the start, those technical decisions can be as much as what's my instrumentation? How am I going to deal with, how am I even going to arrange that instrumentation on a page, to I know I need to write a melody. I need to know I write a theme. I need to know what my harmonic world is. And those are all very technical decisions, not really creative, but technical. And so I will tell you that, so I've spent years sort of studying my own creativity, because I was always frustrated, like, why did I write a good piece of music here? And then the next piece, why was that a crappy piece of music? And so trying to understand what was going on in my process that was sort of preventing me at times or inhibiting me from times. And so one of the things I learned is that during this pre-compositional period, I am the biggest asshole in the world. I'm a jerk. I'm angry. I'm mean. I'm banging my head against the wall. I'm not doing anything right. And but I learned through studying my own process that there's maybe 5 to 10 clock hours in that time that I have to really sort of be in this really uncomfortable sort of beginning phase. And now I know that, okay, if it's a 10 clock hour thing, if I've done 4 hours, like, okay, there's 6 more of this terrible time before it really starts to flow. But anyway, so there's this pre-compositional phase, there's an improvisational experimental phase, and then you're really composing. You're really engaged with your materials and things are working, and then at some point you refine it. So I think most of us at least have some sort of insight into how that process works, but what I've discovered is there's actually a parallel sort of psychological process that goes along with that. And I think once we know what each side of these processes mean to our creativity, I think the easier it is for us to be creative. And so this pre-compositional part of the work, it's very intellectual. Your intellect is in charge of making rational decisions. So for example, one of the things I'll do, maybe I need a theme, or maybe I need some melodic material. And what I'll do, and then that's a rational decision. I'll make that melody, and then I'll make the rational decision that I'm going to build a fugue based on that. And that's one of the things I do typically in every piece that I write, is there's some sort of fugal material that it may not end up in the piece, but it's something that I do to help understand my materials. So for me, I don't think our creativity, our intuition is something we tap indirectly to. I think it's something we use indirectly. Sort of it lives in our peripheral vision. And if I try to look at it, it disappears. And so what happens is I need to find ways to get my intellectual processes to engage in intellectual steps that will feed my intuition and then let my intuition come to the fore. And so during this first pre-compositional phase, I'm feeding that. My intuition is starting to go, oh, what's that? Oh, that's a little bit interesting. That's there, while I'm still making these rational decisions. And then during this improvisation or experimental phase, then my intuition is beginning to actually create some sort of value set. Oh, that material there is good, use that. That material there is not good. And so then you start to engage. And then at some point along the line, your intuition hopefully will take over. That's the best writing you're going to do. Never stop and ask yourself, as you're writing, you're like, wow, there are moments where I'm like, wow, that's a really good 20 measures of music. Don't ask yourself why. Take it and move on. Just keep going, because your intuition is the one that's in charge now. And that's your creativity being able to move things forward. And then at the end, so I'll also say during this phase, by the time I get into this phase of the process, the piece is done. There's a double bar at the end of that spot. I set it aside for 2 days, and what happens is I let my intellect creep back in a little bit, and then I come back and say, okay, this was a good piece of music when I was like sort of in this hyper creative mode. Is this really a good piece of music? Like a little bit of little skepticism sort of sneak back in. And in that process, then I can start refining things, cutting things out and doing that. And so for me, the earlier on you get those external influences into it, beginning to sort of tap your intuition on the shoulder, I think the more meaningful the work will be and the more connected that work will be. So sorry, I'm jumping around. Where'd I go? So the other thing I want to talk about is modeling. And as composition students, your teachers do this to you all the time, right? You say you say, I want to write a string quartet, and they say, well, what string quartets have you listened to? And you go, oh, well, I've listened to Lutoslawski, and I've listened to, I don't know, Shostakovich, and I've listened to that. And I engaged in that as a student all the time, and I still engage in that as a composer, right? I'm going to write something for a specific instrumentation or something. I go see how other composers did that. But to me, that's actually a very technical step. I'm understanding technically what someone else did. For me, the next step is actually going and finding an expressive model. And so this is not necessarily a piece of music. This can be any work of art. And I'm looking for anything that'll elicit some, and it doesn't necessarily even have to be a work of art. It can be a situation in your life. It can be, it can be how wet grass smells to you in spring, something like that, right? There's something that sort of really engages you there. And so, so what I'll do is when I find this expressive model, I find that it captures something in me that I want to express through my own art. And so what I'll do is I'll start tapping into that throughout the compositional process. Sort of, it's a ping back and forth in this intuitive way. And so when I show you my string quartet, the expressive model for that is The Ballad of Alice Brown by Bob Dylan. And so what I would do is, I listen to a bunch of string quartets, that's cool. And then what I do is before I sit down, or, even when I'm not composing, I'd listen to The Ballad of Alice Brown a bunch of times in order to, and what happens, it would get me sort of in that creative, expressive space that I was looking for to write something that somehow captured a similar expressive response. So let me stop there for a second. I'm gonna peruse the the chat here real quick to make sure I'm not. So do I ever have to? Yeah, thank you, Hayden. That's a good question. Yeah, to me, so Hayden's question, if you're not seeing the chat, is do you ever have to visit any of these steps multiple times throughout writing a piece of music? And the answer is yes. And what I will tell you is, and you're probably going to have to too. So one of the things you'll experience when you're writing a piece of music, right? Oh, this is really great. And you write this section of music and you're like, oh, okay, that's really cool. And then all of a sudden you have to write another section of music and you're like, oh. And it's like the whole process has to start over again. So you may have to do some pre-compositional work in order to get yourself ramped up again, to feed your intuition to write that next section. And so I actually talk with my composition students and that there's kind of this, I don't want to say death spiral. There's a loop. There's a loop of, pre-compositional work, improvisation, composing, refining, and then and so it's not sort of this, but it's more like this, right? You're always kind of looping back in that process, right? So yeah, that's an excellent question. So let me catch up with my notes. Oh, so one of the scenarios that a lot of us, I think, at least a lot of you are probably finding yourselves in, is that you go to a performance, hear somebody play some music, you're like, wow, that person's really great. I want to write some music for them, or they maybe hear your piece and they want you to write a piece for them, and so it's the dude, write me a piece situation, right? So we all get this. And and when you get in that situation, you're writing a piece for a specific musician, specific performer, you've got two choices. You can either, okay, yeah, I want to write you a piece of music, and then you can go off into your own little world and write that piece in isolation and then come back with that piece. That's one scenario. Or you can engage with that performer in a way that is going to make it meaningful for them, right? It's not necessarily my piece. Let's think of it as our piece. And if you come to composing in that situation, like that approach, I think what you'll find is if you write a piece of music that really engages a performer, that performer will perform it over and over and over. And so if you can make that connection with that performer, that's more valuable than anything. right? So you'll experience this over your career. You'll write pieces of music, and they have lives of their own. They go off and they go to parties and they go to festivals and they're out there existing, and and it seems effortless at times. And then there's other times where you're kind of grinding away moment by moment trying to get performances. So it can be. So anyway, I want to show you one of the ways I approach that setting. Um, and so this was a couple of years ago. I was at a new music festival and I met Minju Choi, who's a pianist. She's a pianist at Missouri State University. And she was a performer at the festival, and I had a piece, and so I know each other's work and talked at some point. And she said, "Boy, I'd really like you to write me a piece. I really think I'd enjoy that." And I said, "Okay, that's cool." And then we sort of parted ways, and I don't think we've ever been in a room since. That initial, we've had conversation, of course, we've communicated. But so one of the things I wanted to write a piece that was specific to her, that she wanted to play. And so I asked her a couple of things. And the first thing was, I said, "Can you send me a list of pieces that you really, really like?" And it was really kind of this expressive technical model question that I kind of asked myself, right? So what are the pieces you really love to play? And it could be, technically, what do you like about them? And it could also be, what expressively do you like about them? And so I just shared this list. This was part of a correspondence I got from Minju in that process. And so, these were the pieces that she had, she said were sort of models that she really enjoyed playing and liked how they worked expressively. And then she gave me, some guidance down there that hopefully you can read a little bit. But anyway, and that was super valuable. And so at the time I was like, and I will tell you that Totentanz by Liszt is one of my favorite pieces ever. It is just, and one of the reasons I like it is because what it does. So if you don't know this piece, it's a piano concerto type piece. Sometimes it's played as a solo piano piece, but one of the things that it does is it takes the Dies Irae, and it uses it as in a sort of thematic way going through, and it's almost always present and always engaged in that piece of music. And the other thing is it's like totally like super hard, like it's a badass piece of music, right? Like only, it's Liszt. So only like really, really amazing players can play this piece. And so, that also got me really excited. Like, oh, I can probably do anything. Minju can pull that off. So that was also a nice thing to know. But anyway, so the piece I ended up writing, and I don't have a decent recording. I wasn't going to share that one today, but I wanted to share this process with you. Is that I ended up writing a piece that it used the Dies Irae, but it also used, if you know the American folk song "O Death." And so it actually uses "O Death," and it's a similar process of like Liszt did in Totentanz, but I'm actually using the "O Death" folk song and the Dies Irae at the same time as it goes through. So and there's some very specific Totentanz quotes in it as well. So anyway. So for me, when I'm working with a performer, I'm working for another artist, we've all been to those performances where there's the spark that occurs, right? There's the spark that everybody knows something special happened in the room, right? And as a composer, we're sort of, all of our work is done before we get to that point. And so what I do, and so this is something that I believe in very very strongly, is that, so as a composer, I try to create pieces that are supercharged, right? So there's that spark that happens between performer and audience, right? And what I want to do is I want to create as much static electricity when I'm writing that piece of music in order to make that, to give them the opportunity to make that spark happen. Okay. And so the more I can engage with the performer and make it meaningful for them, I think the more likely that spark or that lightning bolt's going to occur. So what I wanted to do, let me check my notes to make sure I'm not far off. I want to check the chat too if I go out of screen. Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Lansing. Yeah, Totentanz is an amazing piece of music. Yeah, cool. All right, I think I'm caught up. I don't see any real questions there, just comments. Good. So I kind of feel like I'm hosting a radio show at times. Let me go to the callers. Anyway, so let me share you a piece of music, because I think to me it's important for you should know who I am artistically, right? And so I want to show you. So the piece I'm going to play to start with is A Cold Coyote Calls. And it was the piece I actually wrote for Bayo, for the Bayo String Quartet, for the festival last year. And so it's one of the things that's interesting is I've known, so I can't remember how long Jason Newcomb's been coming to the festival, but it's probably as long as I have. So Jason, in some form or another, has been engaged with a quartet for the New Music Festival, and then equally as long, and almost as long, have been Sean and Ryan, and then most recently Aviva has come on. But so I've known these guys for a long time, and so last year I finally decided for the festival I was going to write a piece specifically for them, because I think they had each played. I know at least Ryan, Jason, and Sean had each played one of my pieces in a different context, but not part of a string quartet. And so I finally just said, it's got to be a string quartet. Now's the time. And so there was already sort of a familiarity with them as performers and knowing their work in performing my music. And I've probably heard them play over the years, I don't know, 12, 15 concerts. And so I feel like I'm pretty well in tune with their abilities and what they can do. And so I was kind of excited. It felt like I was writing for them as kind of a coiled spring, right? I kind of knew what I was getting myself into, and I knew the possibilities. So there was already, I think, a degree of familiarity there. And then the other was the expressive model, which was the Ballad of Alice Brown, which is a Bob Dylan song. A lot of times I like to write pieces that have a singularity to them. And I think that's one of the reasons I think expressive modeling works for me, is the Ballad of Alice Brown, and I won't get too much into the dark and gritty details of it. It's a murder ballad, and it's really all about desperation. And that's really what this string quartet is about. These sort of desperate, Alice Brown lives on the outside of town with his wife and 5 children, his house broken down, I believe, is the first few lines of that. And it's all about sort of the terrible life that Alice Brown, and there's an even more terrible ending. But I won't get into the details of that. But anyway, in listening to that and then writing the string quartet, so I'm trying to capture that same sense of intensity, that same sense of desperation. So let me, I'm going to share my screen with this recording. So this is the video from the performance last year. That I'm going to share. And yeah, I'll see you on the other side. Sorry. Now it's at the beginning. Thank you. So so this is it's probably a good time to let me sort out and look at see if there's it does. So I'll ask for questions and I'll start reading along here. So caller from Sheboygan, do you have a question? Yeah. Anybody? Cool. Thank you, Serena. Good to see you, Serena, or hear from you, Serena.
It's good to see you, Dr. Allemeier.
Serena's also actually a former UNC Charlotte student. So thank you, Lansing. Yeah, Justin, I see your note there. Yeah, that one's on YouTube. It's if you do a search for me, you can find that one. Yep. Is there a place you can send me an email? I'll hook you up with a score. Any other questions? Because it's gonna start getting really weird now. So And that's like straightforward John Allemeier, what you just heard. The next thing you're going to hear is like totally weird John Allemeier. So
I think Ian's got a question for you down in the chat.
yeah, thank you. Let me see that. I am very intuitively driven, and so I would say, at least in your terminology, there, yeah, it's visceral. As much as I have students who come to me and they have pieces, they have schematics, and they have pieces planned out, and they have all this, and then I say, well, what if it doesn't work? What if the material doesn't fit the schematic? And so that's really so actually that's not a fair statement. So I do, I start out from a structural standpoint, right? And as soon as the structure starts to fall apart, and I know intuitively or creatively or viscerally that it needs to go in a different direction, the structural aspect of it, I don't worry about the structure. I'm not like bound to that. If I know the energy is going a certain direction, and I'm fairly I don't know, and it's an attitude, and maybe it's why I become an administrator. I'm like, I don't know, what's the worst that could happen, right? So anything is going on, like, I don't know, let's try that and see if it works. And I've always approached composition in a standpoint that, I'm going to try something different, and I'm going to go with it. And if, the worst thing that happens, let's all not take ourselves too seriously. The worst thing that's going to happen is I'm going to write a crappy piece of music, right? And that's one crappy piece of music. You don't have to share that piece of crappy music with everybody. You can throw that one away and write a better piece of music. So just, so I'm very sort of fluid in my creativity and how I do things. And what I really like to do is I don't like to be in a fixed space to compose. I'll take my laptop and I'll go sit in a park, or I'll go sit in a busy place and watch people go by, and I'll work on my laptop on a piece of music, just because I don't want to be in a fixed sort of process way. I don't want it to be always I do this and I have my number 2 pencil that I use and that kind of stuff. I'm not that way. So anyway, let me check my interesting. Yeah, it's and it's a give and take. Every piece is different, to be honest. The only thing that's the same for me is that process, is that I'm that I struggled. Yeah, every piece of music starts with a struggle every time. And then if I can work through the struggle, then it's going to be great. And then I'm happy, and it's fluid, and it's exciting. But it's always that process. But whether it comes from, I tell composition students, because I do this quite a bit. So I've got my little my little moleskin book that I use actually as a mouse pad. But in here, like when I'm writing a piece of music, I'll crack this thing open halfway through, and I'll literally write the words, "This piece is about," and I'll draw a line, right? And I'll tell myself, I can't finish this piece of music until I know what this piece is about. And sometimes I sit down and I know, like A Cold Coyote Calls, the string quartet, I knew that was about desperation from moment one, before I wrote a single note. So I knew this was going to happen. Sometimes I'm writing a piece of music and halfway through I can finish that sentence. And then there's some pieces, there's one piece in particular that I wrote that it took me 6 months to figure out what that thing was about. After it was done, it was performed, and I was like really comfortable with this really strong piece. But for whatever, there's this weird ending to it that just was this sort of big shape. Anyway, I won't get into that, but I didn't really understand it for like 6 months. It took my mind long enough to sort of rationalize it, to understand, oh, that's what that's about. So anyway, let's see, make sure I'm not missing anything here. So to Justin's, I believe that Justin's question is there. So I'm fairly self-deprecating in my view on life. And so I consider myself not very smart. And so one of the things that I do is I try to turn everything into binaries, especially in composition. Composition is really, really hard. And if you can simplify it in any way, you probably should. And so with regards to Justin's question about whether the form will be ahead of time, there's really only 2 forms, in my opinion. There's through composed forms, and there's rounded forms. That's it. So at some point along the line, as I'm working, the materials are going to tell me whether it's rounded or not. Like that piece you just heard was rounded like this, like There's like a 5% range, dun, da, 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 like 7 measures at the end. Use that thing that happened at the beginning, and that was, technically is rounded. But otherwise, it was almost completely through composed. And so, so that's a that's one of the things that I do. So, for example, there's only two. If I'm writing a string quartet, there's only 2 beginnings. There's either everybody starts at the same time, or it's additive. Now, inside of that, there's all kinds of gray area, right? Like if it's additive, it could be, one person starts and then maybe a duet begins, but that's additive to me. There's a lot of gray areas within those sort of binary black and white decisions, but that's where I stand on that. So anyway, whether form, so form is part of it, but I think the material as I'm working tells me what the form is. I'm always letting the materials dictate the form as I go. Okay. Let's see. Did I get everybody over here? Yep. Cool. Thanks, everybody. So I'm gonna move on next piece, unless there are any other questions. So this one is sort of external influences, like exponentially compared to anything else I've ever written. And so let me I'll give you a little bit of the background to it, and then I'll play you some of it. And it's really, it's one of the weirdest things I've ever done. Let me find where I am here. So, sorry, sharing the screen again. Moving down here, there's that. So this has been, I guess it's probably close to 2 years ago. I was asked by, so I was commissioned by the Music Teachers Association, North Carolina Music Teachers Association, as their yearly composer. And I know Alejandro's here somewhere. I'm sure he's done that before. And so they give you a commission. They say, here's a bucket of money, but you got to bring your own performers to the premiere. Which is like, well, it sounds like I've got a bucket of money to pay my performers to come to the first performance. But anyway, so the conference was in Winston-Salem, which is where the North Carolina School of the Arts is. And so my son is actually a cellist in the high school program at the North Carolina School of the Arts. And so Brooks Whitehouse, who's the cellist in this picture here, is his teacher. And Paul Sharp, who's the bassist, I've known for probably 25 years. He's a graduate. He and I were graduate students together. And so when I found out the performance was in Winston-Salem, I emailed those two and I said, look, I've got this commission, and you guys could just walk down the hall from your office and play. And I was asking because I thought, well, maybe there's a string trio or a string quintet or something, like a faculty quintet that I could write for, and be it'd be an easy process for everybody. And what came back, and I knew about Low and Lower, I'd written actually for them before, but so Low and Lower so the name of their ensemble is obviously a play on Dumb and Dumber, the movie, right? And so their sort of MO for their performances, like, it's really pretty much slapstick comedy. They do some really, really sort of kind of goofy, funny things. And they do a lot of spoken word stuff. So they talk while they play, they sing while they play. And so so I got this email back when I said, hey, does anybody want to, if I wrote a piece? And they said, yeah, we want you to write a piece for Low and Lower. And I was like, oh my God, okay. And so, and these guys, I know them both really well. And so, so we batted around some ideas, and one was a setting of Cremation of Sam McGee, which, if any of you know that, it's a poem by Robert Service from the 1930s. And it's basically about Sam McGee, who's from Tennessee, and he goes up into the Yukon Territory in Alaska, mining for gold, and all he does is sit around and complain about how cold he is. And so that's sort of it's the silly poem. But one of the things I learned when I was writing this, I'd never heard of the Cremation of Sam McGee. And one of the, I slowly started learning as over the course of, I was working this over a few months, is that there are 2 kinds of people in this world. There are the people like me who'd never heard of the Cremation of Sam McGee. And then there are people who have actually memorized all like 14 stanzas. Like, it's almost like it has this weird cult following. And Paul Sharp is originally, the bassist is originally from Alaska, so that's how he knows it. And Brooks is from, I believe, Vermont or New Hampshire, and so I think it's a cold weather kind of thing. People just know this poem, and it's the silliest, goofiest poem in the world. So anyway, so we decided to do this. I'm going to stop sharing for a sec so I can just talk at you. So one of the things is that, so we agreed on this setting, and so they have very specific sort of things that they do, so spoken word and that kind of thing. And so I have this like enormous like 14 stanza poem that I've got a set, and then on top of that, so I don't know how many of you have done, if you're doing commissions, that sometimes it can end up being a little bit like one of those cooking shows. You open the basket and there's like, oh, I've got to use, kale, and I've got to use, turmeric. And so there's like all these ingredients that are there that are these sort of little requests that you might want to have part of it. This one was unbelievable. So let me go back to Sharon. I'll show you the kinds of things and I was happy to do this. It was really exciting. I don't think I'm complaining about having to have done this, but so here's part of the ingredient list is, so I had to set the cremation of Sam McGee, which is 15 stanzas, which if you understand, that's a ton of text. They wanted a quote from Wagner referencing the Rhine Maidens, and I'll get into that later. They want a quote from Wagner referencing the immolation scene. Of course, this is the cremation of Sam McGee, and I'll get to the whole story here at some point. So Sam McGee is, of course, from Tennessee, which is sort of a relatively warm weather state, and it rhymes with McGee. So Sam McGee is from Tennessee, so I had to figure out how to make references to Tennessee. And then they wanted a country ballad. So one of the sections of it was actually, so I guess I should give you a synopsis of the whole thing. The first part, it's really kind of in three parts. The first part is Sam McGee and his traveling companion traveling around, and he's complaining about how cold he is. And then eventually at the end of that first part, Sam McGee actually freezes to death. But before he freezes to death, he makes his traveling partner, who I believe his name is Cap, he makes Cap promise that if he freezes to death, or if he dies out in this cold area, he has to promise that the last thing he'll do is bury him in this cold ground. He needs to be cremated because he's so cold he doesn't want to spend eternity in this cold ground. And so the second part of the piece of the second section of the stanzas is actually Cap driving around, and it's kind of like this Weekend at Bernie's, if anybody knows that old movie. He's like traveling around this dead body. He's like complaining about how he's got to drag this dead body all over the place until he can figure out how to cremate it. And so the country ballad is sort of this "oh woe is me" sort of thing that goes on. And then the last part of the poem is a series of stanzas where he finally figures out a way to cremate him. And he throws him in the fire, and then he goes away on a hike, because he can't stand to listen to Sam McGee sizzling in the fire. And he comes back and he opens the door to check on the cremation. And Sam McGee is thawed out. He's just fine. And that's the warmest he's ever been since he left Tennessee. And so there's kind of this really goofy, silly ending to it. So anyway, there's those sort of three parts to it. So anyway, so that was the ingredient list that they gave me. This is actually an ingredient list that I kind of used to sort of satisfy this. So there's a part where in one of the first sections that I'll play you. So there's sort of an opening salvo where they sing the opening stanza, and then they start singing back and forth and talking to each other. And one of those is when he's complaining about how cold it is. So the cellist is playing the Tennessee Wagoneer fiddle tune. And then at the same time, it's mashed up with Vivaldi Winter. So I'm getting Tennessee and the cold sort of mashed together there. And then when he's complaining about, so there's a spot where he's hallucinating. He's so cold, he's hallucinating about his home in Tennessee. And so there's an extended quote from Knoxville, summer of 1915. And then there's a section with the funeral march. I don't know if I'll get this far. I use the Mahler Resurrection Symphony for when he comes back and finds him thawed out. And then there's also a resurrection reference with the Russian Easter Overture later in the piece. The piece is about 20 minutes long. I'm not going to give you the whole piece unless in the chat you beg for it. But it's kind of a fun piece to listen to, and it kind of goes by. So let me share that with you. Let me see. I need to stop this sharing. I need to find it. So, so this is just for cello, and it's just a cello and bass. Oh, sorry, I need to get rid of that. Sorry. Let me give me a second. Okay. I think it was open in QuickTime. We'll go back to. I got too many screens going. Give me a second, sorry. Somehow I've lost my control window. Elizabeth, can you help me out on that? You can see my participants list.
Is that working? Sorry, and I was talking and I was muted.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry.
What are you trying to do exactly?
Well, I've lost the share. I've actually lost the Zoom screen. I'm wondering where it is. When I come up, I only see the meeting invitation, but I don't have the screen.
Are you able to click the app icon anywhere?
Yeah, I click it, but all it brings up is the meeting invitation.
No, I'm gonna put you in the waiting room and bring you back and see if that does anything.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that, everybody.
Yeah, no worries. Alright, hi. Let's see if this fixes it. This is my cat shirt, by the way, guys. Let's see. Here we go. Cat shirt.
I'm back. I got it. Okay. Sorry, everybody. I'm just like, all of a sudden I've got all these windows. And they're
Glad to have
okay.
you back. All right.
Yeah,
glad
glad.
And maybe get the spotlight again.
Doing so well that I hadn't had any mess ups there. Okay, let me share that. Let's see. Here's cremation of Sam McGee. Okay, let me make sure back at the beginning. Okay. This is cello and bass. Here we go.
Dr. Allemeier, we're actually not getting any sound.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I bet I didn't. Because I went out and came back in.
Yeah, that's a bitch.
Sorry, everybody. Yep, it's turned those off. Here we go. Thank you.
This stretches on in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The northern lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was the night of Marge, a lake large. I cremated Sam McGee. cold in this land of gold seemed to hold him like a spell. So we often say in his holy way that he'd sooner live in hell. On Christmas Day, we were mushing our way over the Dawson Trail. Todd, they're cold. Through the Parker's cold, it stabbed like a driven nail.
If our eyes we closed and the lashes rose, till sometimes we could not see. It wasn't much fun, but the only one to whimper was Sam McGee. And that very night, as we lay packed tight in our robes beneath the snow, and the dogs were fed, and the stars overhead were dancing heel and toe, he turned to me and, says he,
I'll cash in this trip, I guess. And if I do, I'm asking you, won't refuse my last request.
well, he seemed so low that I couldn't say no. Then he says with a kind of moan,
It's this cursed cold, and it's got right hold, till I'm chilled clean through to the bone. Yet tain't being dead, it's my awful dread of the icy grave that pains. So I want you to swear that foul or fair, you'll cremate my last remains.
well, a pal's last need, it's a thing to heed. So I swore I would not fail.
People go by, things go by. A horse drawing a buggy.
And we started on at the streak of dawn.
In a summer evening,
But God, he looked ghastly pale.
among the sounds of the night,
He crouched on the sleigh and he raved all day of his home in Tennessee.
on the rough wet grass of the backyard, my father and mother have spread quilts. We have my hand, my mother, my father, my uncle, my aunt, and I too am lying there.
And before nightfall, a corpse was all that was left of Sam. sleigh, and it seemed to say, you may tax your brawn and brains, but you promise truth, and it's up to you to remain my last remain. Now a promise made is a debt unpaid, and the cradle has told cold. In the days to come, though my lips were dumb, my heart outburst that woe. A long, long night by the lone firelight, while the huskies round in a ring, howl out their woes to the homeless snows. Oh God, how old that thing.
So that at least to get you through the country ballad part of it. There's I'm gonna skip ahead and see if I can find. There's a whole silly section where they run into the Rhine maidens along the way. I'm gonna skip that part. Sorry if you get seasick from me jumping ahead. Okay. So then this will give you sort of some conclusion to the piece. They made a marshmallow reference there about grilling marshmallows or the cremation.
The crematorium, yes.
Some planks I tore from the cabin floor, and I lit the boiler fire. Some coal I found that was lying around, and I heaped the fuel higher. The flames just soared, and the furnace roared.
Such a place you seldom see.
Then I burrowed a hole in the glowing coal, and I stuffed in salmon. Then I made a hike, for I didn't like to hear him sizzle so. And the heavens scowled, and the huskies howled, and the wind began to blow. It was icy cold, but the hot sweat rolled down my cheeks, and I don't know why. And the greasy smoke in an inky cloak went streaking down the sky. I do not know how long it will snow. I wrestled with my grisly fear. But the stars came out, and they danced about. Ere again I ventured near. I was sick with dread, but I bravely said,
things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. Leaving the Arctic trails and their secret tales that will make your blood run cold. The northern lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they e'er did see was the night on a barge on Lake LaBarge. I created Sam McGee.
Thank you. Let's see, I've got to arrange my screen a little bit differently here. So yeah, that was weird. Like writing that, it was you know, as you can see, and it was really engaging with those musicians in a way that was really meaningful for them. And like I said earlier, when you write a piece for someone who and they really like it, they play it a million times. And so I think they premiered this back in like October of 18, and I think they've performed it 10 or 12 times since then. They actually did a tour of Alaska, so which apparently that went over great in Alaska because it's all about Alaska, and probably everybody knows it. So anyway, are there? I can pause here for questions. Let me. I can't see the chat when I'm sharing. So
I do have a question.
Sure.
How do you deal with pieces that, I mean, that was really fun, that was great. How do you deal with pieces that basically can only be played by one group, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you know, for many years, I have a colleague that I worked with at UNC Charlotte, who's a good friend of mine. He's a musicologist, and he knows what a pragmatist I am, and so I'm always writing things that I know are like I would always write things that are transportable from year to year to year to year. And he knew that I just hated to write that one piece that's only gonna have that one group to play it and that one thing. And so that was, you know, so I'll tell you a story years ago is I was asked to write a piece for, well, Alejandro, geez, you know this, the piece for Beer and Bow and Flute. So Alejandro and I years ago did this project with a percussionist and a flute player. And the percussionist, Greg Beyer, who's at Northern Illinois University, is a beer and bow player. And when we were getting ready to look at those notes, it was, or getting ready to write those pieces, Greg said, you know, I play beer and bow, if anybody want to write for that. And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do that. And you know, and then I'm like, you know, after I said that, I'm like, what in the hell is a beer and bow? Right? I had to go look at it. And, you know, so that was kind of a pivotal, like a moment there. I was like, and so once I figured out, I'm like, you know, this piece probably isn't going to go that far because there aren't just that many beer and bow players, right? And you can find a flute player anywhere, but a beer and bow player. And I will tell you, I'm surprised that piece I get at least 3 or 4 times a year. I get people requesting that, and it's really percussionists that are like beer and bow. You know, they're fascinated with beer and bow, and they can find a flute player. So I kind of ventured down that path, and that piece is a really good example of it. And then, you know, it ended up being not that. It actually ended up being rather transportable. This piece is clearly not going to be transportable very much, right? And so you've got to be able to have people, you know, I don't know how many cellists or bassists would be able to be outside the box that much, you know, self-conscious wise to be able to do those things, right? And I'll tell you, it's really, really, if you're an instrumentalist, trying to sing and play at the same time is hard. And you know, they have a lot of experience doing it. They do it quite a bit, so that's not so much an issue for them. But honestly, Alejandro, and it's a great question. Usually, I probably wouldn't do that if it's a one and done. If you're a one and done situation, someone's like, I've got this one specific thing for this one set of instrumentation, and it's never going to be, you know, done again. I kind of avoid that. I guess it depends on what the opportunity is, honestly. But I have. I've spent several years, and actually the cremation of Sam McGee is kind of the end of that phase, is that I was kind of putting myself in like weird corners with regards to instrumentation. And so several years ago at the festival, I had a piece that was performed. It wasn't written for the festival, but separate from that, which was a string trio with drum set. And the string trio with drum set piece was, you know, like, it was just kind of like, oh, this is cool. I want to write kind of something I wanted to write. And it's actually a piece that has been latched onto by a lot of choreographers. And so it's one that was, it was performed up in Boston with the dance company, and it's going to be done it was supposed to be done in Atlanta in April, but it was, of course, because of the pandemic, that's been canceled, but I'm sure that will happen at some point. So I don't know, I think I was, there's a practicality issue, a practicality aspect of the question that you want to get as many performances as possible. But then it's also sort of, to me, a hampering your creativity aspect too. You know, so the string trio with drum set. There was another one that I did that was alto, flute, vibraphone, and piano. I mean, those, you can find those players, but you know, you have to be the one that sort of puts them together. There aren't a lot of trios like that. So yeah, I guess earlier in my career it was do that at your peril. And now I'm at the point in my career, it's like I'm back to the thing where it's like, I don't know, I'll give that a shot, whatever. So it's kind of fun. I like, one of the things with especially sort of really unique instrumentations and unique situations like that is it actually tamps down your it tamps down your ability to sort of fall into your normal processes, right? Like you can, you know, oh, I always do this, like string quartets, like you just kind of write your string quartet music. And then once you, and I see Lansing, your comment here, which is great. You know, Space Pants is a great example. I wrote for Load Bang for the festival several years ago. And it's, yeah, who else does it? And it's, but it's sometimes I guess the opportunities that I've had when I've done that, I've never regretted because they're really amazing players, right? So when you get the opportunity to work with those totally incredible players like Load Bang or Low and Lower like I did, you know, you just take that opportunity. You know, so that's a great question. Thank you, Alejandro.
Can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
Hi, thanks. This is great stuff.
Thanks.
Going way back to the start of the presentation, when you were talking about compositional stages, at least in terms of your composition process, and you had a pretty clearly delineated kind of, I don't know what you want, different stages. There's, I can't remember each one. There's pre-composition, and then there was something else before composition, and then revising. And then you kind of described, well, what each stage is. And then you went on and talked about how it's not simply a matter of what differentiates these stages is not simply what you're doing, but what part of you is being engaged. It's the intellectual, it's the critical, it's the intuition, and then it's back to the, or whatever. And I'm very curious about that because I think I used to think that way. And now if I'm going 6 months, which is pretty typical for me, I'm writing a piece, there's like 6 months when I'm working on the piece / not working on the piece, meaning that I'm thinking about the piece, but there's not a quarter note, there's not a chord, there's not a treble clef. And then blah, 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 blah. You write the piece, and then you get to the like extracting parts. If it's a piece that we are extracting parts. I used to think, well, that other stuff was pre-composition, and then I'm extracting the parts, and that's like the piece is done. That's post-composition. Just in the last, I would say, 3 years, I've completely changed my mind, and I think when I'm thinking about a piece for 8 months and I'm not writing a note, that is the exact same stage. It's the exact same, it's composition. And when I'm extracting parts, that's composition, because I don't know if I've ever extracted parts for a piece where I haven't ended up changing the piece.
Sure,
I mean,
sure.
right? You're extracting that part. You're going, oh wait, what am I doing here? You see a piece differently when you're looking at just the bassoon line or just the.
Oh, absolutely. And when you see like that's a terrible, like especially when you're obviously large groups like that, right? You don't
Yeah.
focus on the bassoon line. It's like that one over there, and that's you're kind of moving stuff around, and then all of a sudden you're like, that bassoon doesn't do that. That's
Yeah,
terrible bassoon music. What was I thinking?
There could be many, lots of different reasons, but
Sure, sure.
I don't know if this is a question or just to get you to talk a little bit more about that. Why or
Yeah.
what made you feel like actually that there's different stages that engage a different part of you?
Mhm.
Me, it's all the same.
Yeah, sure. Well, I went on sabbatical. So who was that asked that, by the way, just so I can say thank you. Nothing popped up, so I didn't see who that was. So identify yourself.
Lansing.
Hi, Lansing. How are you?
That was
I
me.
thought you said that at the beginning, but it garbled. Yeah, thank you,
Yeah.
Lansing. That's great. So several years ago when I was on sabbatical, my first sabbatical, and actually my only sabbatical so far, probably my only sabbatical now that I think about it. It's kind of a dark thought, but anyway, one of the things I did is I actually just started a composition log for myself, and I have to say the things that I talk about, at least I hope that it gives you insight into looking into your own process, not necessarily that that's everybody's process, but so that's the first thing I want to kind of qualify that. But one of the things I found is so I just kept actually it was literally an Excel spreadsheet, and so when I was on sabbatical and I was composing for hours on end, I would get up in the morning and I would do my work, and then when I break for lunch before I type in the spreadsheet, I'd say I went from 7 to 11 and I wrote 4 measures, and I'd give it some sort of rating, like it went well, it was kind of hard, it was this, and then some sort of thing there. And so that's where I started learning about sort of those stages of my creativity, in that and I think it's so to me I think there are things that are common in a lot of people's processes. When I talk about that sort of that beginning a piece of music and that struggle, I think we all kind of, that's kind of a thing. So there is a generalized I am generalizing things there, but one of the things that when I'm teaching at the festival every year that I like to talk to composers about is a lot of times we self-identify ourselves as composers. And unfortunately, I think that at times puts us in a place where we're talking about ourselves as technicians. And so I think a lot of times, and when I talk to composers, I want to hear them talk about themselves as artists rather than talking themselves as composers, right? We can all agree we're composers. We have something in common in that we all write, we all write music, right? Or we engage in a sound world as artists. But I think understanding sort of our psyches and our inner, our inner gravitations toward being creative, I think is an important part of it. And so to me, just understanding how where my creativity is and how I find it are those avenues that I'm most interested in. We all learn, great orchestration techniques and things in our lessons and in our classes, and we learn, formal ideas and proportional ideas and all those things. And a lot of times, and honestly, as I move into a role as a director of a school of music, one of my questions, I think, to my faculty is, how are we teaching creativity? And that's not necessarily just for composition, that's a thing, right? But as a pianist, like if I ask, if I would just walk down the hall and ask one of my piano students or one of my voice students, how is your teacher teaching creativity? That's kind of a dicey thing, right? And so, so to me, it's we need to have that. There's that technical skill side of it. Yes, I agree with all that, but I think there's an aspect of it's really, and it comes down again, and I'll go back to where I'm about to be as a director, is there's this conservatory model, and we teach, if you look at your applied studios, if you look at your piano lessons and your violin lessons and your clarinet lessons, we're talking about embouchure, we're talking about maybe thumb position, we're talking about those things, but it's how do we really become, how do how do we transcend all that all that technique and actually show our artistry? And yeah, yeah, Lansing, I see that, and that, you know, that's really, you know, so for me, I think that the thing that I was talking about and sort of showing you is how I, as at least as an artist and a pedagogue, how do I address that, you know, those two things, right? I have to make sure when my composition students, you know, are putting their portfolios to go on to, you know, to some of your graduate programs, what are the technical skills that you guys are going to want to see to make sure that they're doing that? But then also, how do I release them as an artist, right? How do we, you know, it's not just troping all the great composers, but it's also, you know, I'm interested, and you know, I know Lansing's here. I know Alejandro's here. You know, as composition teachers, you know, it's always sort of an amazing moment when we hear a student for the first time actually write a piece that sounds like them. You know, it sort of blows you away, and you're like, wow, I finally heard who that person is compositionally, and you know, that's an amazing moment. And so, Lansing, and you know, it's more of this conversation. I don't know if I'm really answering your question, but it's really how I, yeah, Alejandro, great point. Yeah.
No, thank you for that.
Yeah, sure. And Alejandro, you make a great point in classical performers and how they're trained. And I will say one thing, and it's something that I think of when I play the string quartet that I played for you. You know, there's all the fast, exciting stuff at the beginning, and there's all the fast, exciting stuff at the end. And that's really for, you know, that's for the audience, right? That's for everybody that's out there and listening and like, wow, this is fun and exciting. And then there's that lyrical section in the middle. And I think one of the things that and maybe I'll impress upon you, this is a composition lesson for everybody listening, is that these performers, they spend their entire careers trying to make beautiful sounds, right? And so, you know, I can have them hacking away at their violins, and that's really cool, and I think that's awesome, but I don't know if that's particularly rewarding for them. And so for me, there's always sort of a moment where I allow them to be lyrical. I allow them to show their artistry, you know, in a more, I don't want to say, I guess, a traditional context, or a more in a way that they're trained in certain ways. And so I do like to let that out at times in a piece of music, because I think that's endearing, I think, for a performer, between the performer and composer, understanding that, you know, you're not just here, you are not a puppet, and I'm not just pulling the strings, but it's a give and take. You know, and it's, you know, you can use all kinds of analogies. Hopefully I'm lobbing them a softball that they can hit out of the park, right? I'm giving them every opportunity to succeed when they step on that stage, or step into that brewery, or step into wherever they're performing my music. And I'm hoping it's not just a stage. Yeah. Any other open it up for questions in general. It's a great dialogue, everybody. Stunned silence. That's when I know I'm doing a good job. Anybody?
Hello.
Go ahead. Yes.
I'm Alvin, and
Hi.
I have a question about your piece for Low and Lower.
Mm-hmm.
That was a wonderful piece, and I'm
Well,
wondering, in the collaborative, like, rehearsal process, or, you know, when you're working with them, did you kind of, how was the process? You know, especially at, you know, those lines that they are like singing or speaking, you know, those are like expression, and that involves a certain kind of like performance, like action, or like acting, and I'm wondering if that is like totally their ideas, or did you put your input, or is it like together, like coming up to, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. Thanks. So I'll sort of describe the process, and that once we sort of finalized that I was going to do a setting of the cremation of Sam McGee, excuse me, so they actually initiated a Google, not a Google, Dropbox paper It's a collaborative thing where you can, it's almost like a chatting feature. I don't know, it's one of those collaborative things that they, so they throw in the text and then they make bubbles that they go, oh, we'd like to see this here and this could happen there. And so, and they were, there were times where there were ideas that they threw at me, and they're really, really great people and great musicians to work with. And that there were times where I was like, oh, okay, that's a little much. I'm not quite sure I want to go that direction. Like, oh no, cool, that's fine, And so it was very much a dialogue for a long time. And we had this sort of collaborative, I was in Charlotte, they were in Winston-Salem thing going on. They're throwing ideas at me. I was like, yeah, that'll work. And then I throw back, oh, what about if I did this? And so there was really quite a bit of dialogue. And then I started throwing sketches to them. The first section, third section, just making sure, hey, can you do this? Does this work well? And so then we got into an issue of, and one of the things so I actually I could actually bring up the score. I'm going to see if I can do this while I'm talking, and show you what they had, so you can see how much they really put into it. And there are moments in there where I really just they had the text, so the text was fixed, and a lot of it was kind of measured out, but some of it was, I actually put comments in the score like, I'm going to trust your comedic timing here, kind of thing. And so some of it was, it was free flow. I mean, and sort of back to Alejandro's question about writing for someone very, very specific. Like, by the time I was done with this, I knew nobody else was going to do anything with it. So I just told them, do your own thing with it. So they had a lot of latitude in what they could do. But I'm gonna, here, let me show you, I'll share the score with you, and we can kind of scroll through and you can see. I'm thinking this is the whole score here. So this is just, so here's the text, which of course is just eternal, right? So some of the stuff in here, so the quote from Knoxville, that's actually James from Barber, Samuel Barber, is actually a James Agee text. So I kind of threaded that in there. So I had to sort of footnote the libretto, if you will. There was also a big section, I didn't play this. This is actually text that they wrote about Labarge maidens, which I didn't show you that section. It's super silly, but a lot of fun. Anyway, to the score. So, oh, that's just the text, sorry. Gotta find the score. So anyway, they had quite a bit of latitude in what they could do. Sorry, I'm thinking and looking at the same time. Let me see, I think this one's it. Yeah, there it is, okay, sorry. Share that one. There we go. Sorry, if we can, maybe I should reduce the size there, yeah. So, scrolling back up to the top, so there's the text where it ends. So this is that first section where they sang, so of course I put I notated everything for them, the rhythms and things. But then when they got into the spoken word aspect of it, so this is what I did. And so I gave them sort of starting points, and then I would, and as I was doing this, and if you can imagine writing a piece like this, I actually, I'd play I did this in Sibelius, so I'd play it, and I'd actually have to recite the text as it was going to get the timing down. And so I gave them, sort of starting moments for the text. They actually went in some spots they did it, sometimes they didn't. They actually had to write out a rhythm of the text, so they could, and that was really a coordination between their hands and their speaking, right? Like they can't just, this is doing something that is measured, and then they can't just talk freely from that, right? It's all kind of one stream of consciousness through that. So so there's, so I'm telling, after that, this is where that's going to start. But they wrote some of that in, some of it they didn't. And then some of it's a very free notation, on Christmas Day. So this is just paused on Christmas Day. And so this is more, it's measured, but sort of a more aleatoric feel to it as it flows through. So yeah, and so they had a lot of, they had opportunities to put themselves in with regards to timing. So for example, at the when he talks about stuffing in Sam McGee, or at the very end, he talks about I cremated Sam McGee. I had that sung. He did that spoken. That's fine, right there. So there's some nuance there, but you can see actually I gave them some stage directions, like a pal's last need is a thing to heed, so I swore I would not fail. And then in a weak voice, people go by, things go by. Of course, because he's freezing to death. And then a horse drawing a buggy. And so, perhaps a worried look from Brooks to Paul, like, why is he talking about that all of a sudden? So there are some stage directions in there. Here's one, very simple, childlike. On the rough, wet grass of the backyard, as he's singing the barber, that kind of stuff. So is that, hopefully I'm answering that question there.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for
Yes.
showing us the score.
Yeah,
And
sure. And it was, I'll tell you this, so the experience writing that piece is, so I agreed to write the piece. This was in, like May or something. And we solidified the ideas by June. I did some sketches in July, and then I was at an artist residency for 3 weeks in Chicago. Give me a second. The Ragdale Foundation. It's just north of Chicago, in Lake Forest, Illinois. And I did that. So I ended up finishing the piece there. And so it was this really weird thing. So I'll just tell you, like, the cremation of Sam McGee, how sort of weird this experience was that I had never heard of it. So in May, I agreed to this, June, I agreed to it. Start writing it in July, and then I'm like fully engaged in writing the piece in this artist residency. And so I go to this artist residency, and the first day you sit around with all the other artists, and I was the only musician at that residency, and we're talking about the sort of projects that we're doing. And so I tell them, yeah, I'm doing the setting of the cremation of Sam McGee, and there's a guy who's on the board for the foundation there. And he's like, my grandson calls me up every week, and he recites a new stanza from the cremation of Sam McGee that he's memorized. I'm like, really? That's kind of a weird coincidence. That was So then a couple of days later, I'm on, I do my weekly call to my parents, and they say, oh, you're at this artist residency. What are you working on? I'm like, oh, well, there's this poem, The Cremation of Sam McGee. And actually my mother tells me, she says, she's like, oh, yeah, your grandfather used to recite that to us as we were driving across the country on road trips. And I'm like, how have I never heard of this poem before? And so here's the killer one, is that, so this is around the time that John McCain died, as I'm writing this piece. And so, I take a break and I'm watching TV, and I get a text from Brooks, who's the cellist, and he said that John McCain's daughter during the eulogy quoted the cremation of Sam McGee. And the reason she quoted it was because he learned the cremation of Sam McGee through Morse code of the walls of the Hanoi Hilton when he was a prisoner of war in Vietnam. And I'm just like, this is like the weirdest, like the strangest, like there's all this stuff going on. I'm like fully like writing this piece. It was really just amazing. So I was, and I'm locked in this room, self-isolated, sort of locking myself in this room, trying to get this crazy piece done with all this stuff going on. And I'm quoting Mahler, and I'm quoting Wagner, and I've got all this stuff going on. It was wild. So anyway, it was kind of one of the hardest pieces I've written, just because of all the sort of nuances. And it's really, when I listen to it, it doesn't sound like me stylistically. It sounds totally like me artistically, if that makes any sense. So, it sounds, yeah. Hayden, I see your hand going up. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was just say, it's kind of like Dr. Ruti was saying, how it doesn't have the surface details, but it displays the deeper calligraphy.
Nice, I like that.
Like that from what you're describing.
Yeah.
I actually had a question about, so like when you were talking about the conundrum of how to teach creativity in our current system, and I was wondering what some of yours, and I know that obviously it's not necessarily the solution that everyone must do, but I was wondering if you could share like some of the solutions that you came up with that worked for you to kind of respond to that kind of conundrum.
Absolutely. So the one thing I will say is that So here's what I really learned, and it comes actually from working with artists who are not musicians. And so as soon as you walk into the room with a choreographer, let's say, it's no longer about quarter notes, half notes, tempo, dynamics. It's not about anything like that. It's all about energy. It's all about direction. It's all about give and take, those sorts of things. And so what happened for me is when I started working with artists, with choreographers. So E.E. Balkos, who's a longtime friend and collaborator. So one of the things I went into, so he took a percussion ensemble piece of mine and he choreographed it. And so I walked into the studio with him, and like separate from my interactions with dancers or anything, I just wrote the piece of music, right? I just wanted to write a percussion ensemble piece and had a percussion ensemble to play it. And so he heard that and he wanted to choreograph it. And so I go into the studio with him, and I'm sitting in the corner, and then he's working with the dancers, and he's like, let's take it from the top. And he comes over and he sits next to me. And so as the piece is going on, he's talking about this elaborate narrative that's going on between this dancer is having an affair with this dancer, but this dancer doesn't like this dancer, and these two people don't like each other, and it was all about this sort of narrative. And I was like, but I don't think that way when I write. That's, like, it wasn't about that, right? It was about me like doing a badass percussion ensemble piece. And, and so that was really sort of out of body. I was like, what is this? Like all of a sudden I was confronted with someone else's creativity and how they thought. And so then as E.E. and I began working together regularly, we of course started that, okay, he was taking pieces that I had and choreographing them. And then we had to done at some point, we're like, okay, I need to write something specifically for you to choreograph. And so we went through it like several years of phases where, he would be, I would do some sketches, he would come in and talk about them, and then he'd start moving to the sketches. And so I'd be like, I'd be like, wow, I'm seeing movement with regards to the sound that I'm making, and I'm not even sure I'm really comfortable with that sound yet. And so it became sort of, I had to have this intuitive connection with my collaborator in order to make this whole thing work. And so it was no longer about like the technical stuff. Like it was almost like, that's like my bag. All of a sudden that was my baggage, right? He had nothing to do with that. I'm the one that had to make the music side work, and he has to make the dance side work. But we had to come together in some sort of artistic agreement that we didn't have a common terminology for. Vincent Thomas, who's a choreographer, he's at Towson University in Maryland, in Baltimore, and he would come to when we had the dance collaborations here with the festival. He had a thing where we would get together, and so you like a choreographer and a composer would stand across from each other, and the composer would say a musical term, and the choreographer would respond with a dance term, whether they understood what each other meant or not. And so it's kind of the point being that like there's a wall here that we're going to have to get through, right? And so really for me it was working collaboratively with other artists. And so so that actually changed me profoundly in how I address other musicians now. It's not that I want to get to know like what are the technical concerns we're going to do, but I want to know like, what do you like to do as an artist? Like, what is your thing? Are you like the pianist that I work with was a really, virtuosic pianist, but she had very specific things she thought about expressively within that, within that virtuosic context. And so it was being able to teach myself to be able to have those conversations with musicians or other artists without it, in ways without it being a technical conversation. And so, Hayden, that to me, and there are in programs composition programs across the country. There, when I was a graduate student, we did a words and music collaboration class with the Writers Workshop at the University of Iowa. And that's really what we don't really say what that's about, but it's really about talking to another artist and seeing what you have a lot more in common with artists outside of music than you think. And they worry and have they're self-conscious as much as anybody. There's as self-conscious as you are, and they're trying to hide it as much as you are. And but being able to think in terms in artistic terms rather than technical terms, And if you can have that experience with an artist that's outside of music, I totally recommend that, because that's what changed me forever. And I think my writing has changed because I don't know, I like to think there's a sense of drama to my music. And I think that comes from working with music that's in a dramatic setting, which is a stage setting. And so even when it's just, say, Bayo string quartet, I'm always engaged in sort of the dramatic intensity and the dramatic shape that's going on there. Rather than it just being, oh, I've got to get to this point. I don't know. So Hayden, does that help?
Yeah, I have to think about that a lot.
Yeah, sure.
No, I'm not muted. Okay, I have to think about that a lot, because that's like when I was and sometimes I didn't catch on, because then I keep thinking about some of the things that you're saying, and I had to. It's like I'm thinking like, oh, what does this like? I try to imagine that, and then it's like I missed something else that you said.
Right. Sure,
Yeah.
sure. Well,
Yeah.
and that's kind of, this context is built to sort of shake you up a little bit, right? You're going to hear from a lot of different people with a lot of different perspectives, and it's really, really valuable to take that in, because it took me a long time to figure out that there's a compositional approach, and then there's a John Allemeier compositional approach, and I've got to figure out what all those things are. And as those experiences over the trajectory of your careers, so much is, I look back at the things I've done, and I'm sort of marveled at the sort of things I've stumbled, I stumbled through naively, and they worked out, and then, I get a second shot at them eventually, and it's a totally amazing experience. So yeah, for sure. Let me make sure I'm not missing anything in the chat here. Yeah, that's a great comment about drama and composing. Yeah, thank you for that one, Trevor. Yeah, I think we got a few minutes left if anybody else wants to jump in with a question. Yeah, thanks, Trevor. Another good comment. Anyone? Bueller? Sure, that's not the first time you've heard that this week.
I actually have something to kind of throw out into the world and see how people respond to it. I was going to type it, but I thought it might be easier to say it. So I know we're probably using the word drama in a couple of different like definitions, and so like that's kind of going around, but it actually triggered an interesting thought for me that like thinking about things dramatically and thinking about things aesthetically are almost like different means to the same end. Like you can still produce something that is dramatic without thinking about it dramatically, and you can still produce something that is aesthetically pleasing, but only thinking about it dramatically. I don't know if anybody has a response to that, but I thought that was an interesting correlation in my head.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And yeah, I mean, and there's it's. Sorry, if anybody wants to respond to that, I can wax nostalgic in a minute, but it's an interesting thing that there, the thing for me is being an artist and being a composer. There's so much. It's such a complex thing, right? It's part of our psyche, it's part of our intellect, it's part of all those things, but then it's interacting with the outside world, it's all these things. And, so we get these resultant things, and I think it's kind of back to what Hayden was saying is like, wow, somebody said something and it made me think of something totally differently than I usually thought of it before. And that's, I will tell you, I met with my, with my faculty leaders at James Madison a couple of days ago, and I told them that if it feels like adrift, if it feels like we're adrift, it's because we're adrift, and that's the good news. And so one of the things I feel like right now as a leader in a big music program right now is that I have the opportunity now to take a sledgehammer to the conservatory model. Because, and not necessarily that I want to, that not that it's James Madison, but I think any leader of a school of music right now has that opportunity, because we saw, you know, if you look back, when I came to James Madison to interview in January, it was a totally different world than when I'm starting on July 1st. And the whole conservatory model is upside down. Some of it's online, some of it's not. And so what's going on right now is we have the opportunity to sort of rebuild this whole model, because everybody saw how quickly it could change, and it needs to change in that way. And so I have the opportunity to, yeah, don't throw my baby out with the bathwater, I promise, Lansing. But I think, you know, there's the famous adage that, you know, never let a good crisis go to waste. And I think each of us here on this call and this festival has the opportunity to sort of motivate change, with regards to at least higher education in music, for sure. So yeah, I think it's going to be a different time, and it's going to be different now because it has to be. And I find that to be really exciting. I mean, even though I'm totally, you know, after this I've got to figure out how many face shields I have to order for my faculty. I mean, that's not really sort of a creative thing, but it's, you know, if I can talk them into all wearing face shields, I think I can probably talk them into at least rethinking the curriculum a little bit. So, so anyway, that's where I stand.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, well, we'll see. You'll see. Maybe check in next year and you'll see what happens. I don't know.
I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Anybody else? Okay. Well,
thank
yeah,
you so much, John.
Thank you, everybody, Lansing, and everybody that jumped in. I really appreciate it, and those of you who were there. I have been a fan and advocate and supporter of the Charlotte New Music Festival since day one. Elizabeth came to me in 2012, and she's like, "I got this crazy idea," and I'm like, "All right, I'll do what I can to help," and I've been here ever since. So, and she and I have been sort of on parallel paths, building things ever since. So, so I really appreciate Elizabeth, and you all know how special she is. So, anyway, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thanks for all the support, you and Alejandro.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
All right, guys. Well, thank you for coming and tuning in for this. I'll see you guys. What do we have next? We have a career workshop with Bayo String Quartet at 4:30. So grab a break and tune back in a half hour-ish. All right, guys. Take
You're
it
right.
easy. Thank you, John.
Same Zoom room, right?
Yes.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes.
Take care.
See ya.